Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the Entrepreneurship Forum. Today I'm honored to present a special guest to you who I've known for a while. He teaches me a lot of life's lessons as well as teaching me how to fly fish. And he's had a successful career, and I will let Jack Emery tell you all about it. So without any further ado, let's give a big hand to Jack Emery.
I kind of wonder whether I can say anything that will be of value to you. The reason so is you guys are all young people, and I'm almost 80 years old. So what can an 80-year-old guy tell you that has any value? Look at the worlds that we grow in, that they're different. The world I grew up is entirely different than your world. I remember Pearl Harbor. There isn't another person in this whole darn building that'd do that. I remember when you got sick when you were a kid, if you had measles or mumps or whooping cough, the Board of Health showed up and they put a big plaque in the window that says measles and you're not allowed out of the house. I remember once we had some kind of disease, I don't remember what it was, that even my dad couldn't come home. He'd bring groceries and set them on the back porch. Because if you got any kind of communicable disease, you had to stay in the house. I remember when the greatest fear you had as far as disease was concerned was polio. If you got polio, you could end up in what they called an iron lung. Does anybody know what that is? Ever heard of that?
It's a contraption that made compress the lungs automatically for the person because they couldn't.
It was like a big coffin. People would have to lay in it, and it would work their lungs so they could breathe. Polio was a really dreaded disease. This was a little different world. People didn't own automobiles either. We were bus people. First time we ever owned a car, I was 12 years old. And you've never heard of the car that we owned. It had one seat in it, and it was a 1939 Hudson Terraplane. Any experts here on Hudson Terraplanes? No experts on Hudson Terraplanes. But that's the different world that we live in. And here's one that'll totally blow you away. When I got out of high school and attended college, they had a quarter system rather than a semester system. How much do you think I paid per quarter to go to BYU? Anybody dare a guess at all?
$300.
$40.
$100.
$50 a quarter. For a whole year of college, it was $150. But you know why it isn't so quite as depressing as you think? Do you know how much money you can make if you had a job? 15 cents an hour. And as the years went by, it got clear up to 25 cents an hour. I've often said, we're playing the same game today we always play. We just use bigger numbers. Anybody here want to work for 25 cents an hour?
School for 5 minutes semester share.
You like that $50? That's a good one. Between my junior and senior year in high school, I went to Alaska to work. Why? Because you could get $5 an hour in Alaska, and I could get 25 cents in Utah if I could find a job. I went and worked in the gold fields in Alaska, got $5 an hour, worked 7 days a week. Once they start mining there, they mine around the clock, because during the wintertime, everything freezes up solid, and they have what they call permafrost in the ground, and they can't do a lot. So once they start, they start. And I was out in the hills working. I arrived in Alaska with $5 in my pocket, and when I left Alaska, I had the same $5 bill. There was no place to spend it out in the hills. But you know what? I had the best senior year you ever saw, because I came home with $1,500. I could take a date out. I could go to a movie, buy a hamburger and a malt for $2. Think how many dates you can have if you got $1,500. I mean, I had a great time, guys. There are a few negative things at that time in the world. Wars. During the Second World War, they started what they call the draft. Does anyone know what the draft is?
Yeah, it's conscription, right?
I didn't have to worry about the Second World War because I was too young, but when Korea War hit, I had to start worrying about it. Because you could get a letter one day that says, "Greetings from the President of the United States." Guess what? You're going to be a soldier. That isn't the exact words they used, but that's what it meant. Well, in order to avoid the draft, what'd you have to do? Either had to enlist in the Navy or the Air Force. Well, they're going to get you one way or the other. Those ways you had a choice. If you had drafted, you're going to be a foot soldier. And so I got involved in that part of the world. There's other things that are kind of interesting that I saw that you've never seen. Today we talk about race relations. When I was a young man, there were no black people in Utah. We had one black fellow in our high school class, very popular kid. He was our senior class president. Really nice guy, only black man I'd ever seen. And then I went on an LDS mission to the South. I learned something really interesting. I was in Arkansas. In the local 5 and dime store, they had 2 drinking fountains. One say coloreds, one would say whites. They had 2 restrooms, coloreds, whites. If you were black, you couldn't sit at a lunch counter. I was in Arkansas when Governor Faubus stood on the steps of the Central High School and wasn't going to let the black kids into the high school. The 101st Airborne of the United States Army was there to get him in. So these are things that I had happen to me as a young man, but what's that got to do with business? The thing that I learned in life is this, and this is my motto. I've always been, it's kind of an interesting motto. A lot of people have real fancy mottos, but mine's real simple. It's simply this: you can't steal second base and keep your foot on first. There's risk in everything you do. I don't care what it is. There is risk in everything that you do in life. So you're never going to steal second place and keep your foot on first. You have to be willing to try things. You can't be afraid of failure. Here's a quote from Winston Churchill I've always loved. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It's the courage to continue that really counts. The difference between success and failure is one thing. The guy that succeeds gets up one more time. Everybody's going to fall down. Every darn one of us are going to fall down. I was a scoutmaster one time for 200 years. Well, it seemed like 200 years when you're dealing with 12-year-old boys. Had a van full of kids one day. We were driving down I-80, passing where the Salt Lake Country Club is there, and there were some guys from the utility company were digging in a hole. I guess it had some kind of problem. Hot summer day, these guys out on there digging a hole and throwing dirt out. And just beyond the fence, there's guys out there driving out on golf carts playing golf. And I said to the boys, which one of these guys makes the most money? The one down there in the hole throwing mud, or the guy out there on the golf course playing golf? Oh, guess it's got to be the guy playing golf. What's the difference? What's the difference between that guy in the hole with the shovel and that guy sitting out on the golf course? Education. It's just education. But you know something? I wasn't very good at that. I don't think I'd have ever graduated from college if I hadn't got married. My wife threatened to leave me or kill me, one of the two. I think her exact quote was, "I don't believe in divorce, but I got nothing against murder." From the time I left high school to the time I graduated from the University of Utah, 7 years. So those of you that have been at it a little while, hang in there. Because, you know, time does go by. Well, let's talk about business. And today I'm going to talk about all the weird things. I tried a lot of things in life. I tried all kinds of things in life. I had one class I took at the University of Utah in business law. The teacher was a fellow by the name of Dean Condor. I still remember his name. I remember one lecture he gave, just one. You know, when I graduated in 1960 from the University of Utah, let's see, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110. Whew. Over 50 years ago. How many kids here in this group can remember a lecture that you heard 50 years ago? But I remember the one thing that Dean said. and I just always remember it. He says, never be afraid to try something new. Never get stuck in a job that you don't like, or don't be afraid to move. If you have to move, if you're going to advance, if you get stuck in a job for 2 or 3 years and you're not going anywhere, then go look for something else. And so I kind of took that to heart, and I've tried lots of different things in my life, most of which I failed at, to be honest with you. Most of which I failed at. But there's things that happen when you work that really are kind of surprising, that you never can really identify. My brother and I decided one time to be real estate developers. We didn't know nothing about real estate developers. But we were good at one thing. We're pretty good salesmen. We can go out and we'd raise money. I can go see you and get 20 grand from you, and I get 50 grand from you, and, well, $2.50 from him, or whatever. And we'd raise money for different projects. So we built this great big project. It was great. We were going to get rich. But then something happened that we had no control over. Do you know what the prime interest rate is? You all know what prime interest rate is? Shake your head if you do. That's the rate at which banks lend money to each other, really, basically. It's down around, probably around 1% now, isn't it? Or 2, or
3 point.
I don't even know. I'm out of the business world. I'm happy to be out. We had a construction loan at about 3 or 4%. And then what happened to prime? I think it went as high as 18. Well, we couldn't meet our obligations. I didn't have anything to do with that. Why should I be suffering for that? Not only that, I had another problem that I never had ever anticipated, and that's the thing known as a labor union. They were always going on strike for one reason or another. I walked into a place when I was trying to get this thing finished because this money was killing me. I walked in and went in, the carpenter sitting on the steps. I says, haven't you got something to do? He says, no, I've driven my quota of nails for today. I says, you what? As a union member, he could only drive so many nails a day. That was in his union contract. I didn't expect things like that. Business is full of surprises. We raised money one time for a fellow by the name of Peter Ravine. He was an absolute fantastic performer. He was a magician to put on a beautiful show, but he needed money to take it on the road. So we went out and we raised money, and he put a great show together. Fell flat on his face. Not the show, the business part of it, because what I didn't know, you'd take a show to a given theater in a given city, and guess what showed up? The union laborers. You had to have so many stagehands. You had to have so many people carry it out of the truck and into the building. And for every 4 guys that worked, you had to have a supervisor. You know who got all the money? The unions. I didn't know about unions. I learned the hard way. That thing went belly up. My real estate project went belly up. I've been beat to death. I thought, how do you survive in this? So there are things that happen. You'll make plans, you'll want to do this, you'll think it's going to happen, you've thought it through very carefully, and then all of a sudden something jumps up and bites you. I finally got one of the premier jobs available in the whole country. I was hired by IBM Corporation. Now, at that time, IBM was the epitome. All the kids that graduated from the college found out that I got the job with IBM. They thought, oh, you lucky dog. And I used to thank the dear Lord every night for IBM. Well, it was a great job, and I loved it. And I became a salesman. I found out that it was easier to talk than it was to work. I'll tell you an interesting side story. When my youngest daughter was in kindergarten, I got a call from her teacher one night, and she was laughing. She said, I've got to tell you what your daughter said in class today. I thought, oh boy, what family secrets were exposed to the world? She says, I asked each of the children to stand up and tell where their daddies worked. One of them stand up and say, well, my daddy's a doctor, he works at the hospital. And another one stand, well, my daddy's a lawyer, he works at the courthouse, or whatever. She said, when your daughter stood up, she said, my daddy doesn't work, he just talks. Well, she had me figured out when she was 5 years old. So then I went to work for IBM Corporation, and I loved it originally. Then I found out that big corporations don't like wild ducks. They want everybody to fit into the pattern. You know what we had? First place, a dress code. You wear a dark suit, you wear a white shirt, which I don't qualify. Your dark suit would probably fit. Then you got a white shirt. You could probably get a job at IBM. Maybe.
Only today.
IBM's not what it was. Striped ties, no patterns, they had to be striped tie, white shirt, and dark suits. We're all the same. I was in a class, well, they gave you a lot of training. I have to hand that to them. I was in a class in San Jose, California. Every morning they had us stay in at a hotel and they pick us up on a bus and haul us out to the site. Well, originally we'd hear lots of chatter, guys getting acquainted and talking. But after about 2 or 3 weeks of this, it was really quiet on the bus. People were getting tired of the whole thing. And one morning I heard this voice in the back say, this is just like being in the Army, except we don't wear uniforms. Another voice looked up and says, look around, buddy, because you all had to look alike. Why didn't I stay with a big company? And I'm not just picking on IBM, I pick on all of them because it's pretty. They had a corporate culture that figured if they didn't invent it, it wasn't worth having. Do you know the Xerox, the copy thing? That was originally brought to IBM, and they said, no, we don't want them. If we can't develop it, it isn't worth having. That's not exactly what they said, but that's what they meant. They weren't looking for any outside sources. And they had a way of controlling totally what you made. You were actually a commission-paid salesman, but they could control it, and here's how they did it. When I went to work for IBM, I used to get $2 a point, and here's how you did a point. If you leased a machine at $100 a month, you got 100 points. So I know that's too small of a number. $10,000 a month, you got 10,000 points, and you got $2 a point. That's when I started in 1960. When I left in 1966, you got 30 cents a point. And your territory went. If you started making too much money, they dropped your territory, they kept your point total, and they totally controlled your income. And as much as I enjoyed my job, I didn't like my income cut every year. And so I left IBM. I then became a stockbroker. Sounds like a good thing in the financial industry. 1969, the market went. Just as I started, it was a commission job. I could make no money. Well, I didn't tell the market to go down. It wasn't my fault. I studied hard. I had to pass all the tests to become a stockbroker, and you have to have all kinds of qualifications. Went to all that work, and it all fell apart. Problems, more problems. Then I got a job with a company called Telex Corporation, which was a direct competitor of IBM. I was their #1 salesman because I knew what IBM products were. I'd sold them. And I knew how to whip them in the marketplace. I sold lots of products with Telex. But you know something? The time came when they didn't work anymore. I about took the First National Bank of Denver out of business. We put in a whole new system for them. I always wanted people to run parallel. Put ours in and keep your other one going until we know it works, then you can transfer. And they said, well, we don't have them. We've got to just make a complete transition. Do it over a weekend. We put it in. Could never bring it up. The banking business came to a dead halt in Denver, Colorado. Nobody could get any money in. Nobody could get any money out. Everything stopped because the computer stopped. And whose fault was it? Well, Telex. That destroyed the ability to sell anything. That information got through the marketplace like wildfire. And so when I go to make a call and try to sell somebody my products, they say, you're the guys that about shut down the bank. We don't want to talk to you. I didn't expect to have to sell a product that didn't work. More problems. Well, eventually my brother and I decided to start our own company, and that's kind of a long story too. I went to work for a company in Phoenix, Arizona that bought and sold used IBM equipment. And I did very well. Things were going great. I used to work on a nice commission, straight commission again. I'm not afraid of that. And if you have any inclination towards selling, don't be afraid of straight commission. As long as you get up in the morning, go to work, and go to bed at night. It's all you need in life. The ability to get up every day and go to work. Not many people can take care of themselves. A lot of people just need someone pushing them around. But if you're a self-starter, you can make a good living talking, just like I did. But anyway, I worked for this company in Phoenix, Arizona. Our commission structure was very simple. I got 30% of any net profit. That was a good commission. That worked really good until I did a great big deal with Coca-Cola Corporation. There was $500,000 profit. Let's see, 500,000 times 0.3. That's 150 grand. That's the thing that salesmen always, think about. Wouldn't it be neat to knock a home run? I thought I'd hit a home run. Until the boss says, I'm not going to pay you that much money on this deal. You didn't work that hard on it. I said, yeah, I closed it in 2 weeks. I found it, went after it, and got it. He refused to pay me. He said, I'll give you 10 grand for the deal. I thought I was entitled to 150 grand. Somehow they didn't balance out. And so I had got a job for my brother there at the same time, so my brother and I and the rest of the sales force all walked out, the whole bunch of us. And we decided to start our own company. Now, we had no business plan. We had no big preparations. We just walked out the door. Most successful companies don't start that way. We went and rented an office. Let me tell you how much paid-in capital we had. $750 between the two of us. That's all we had. We went to an office building and rented a room, rented an office, put telephones in, and sat on the floor making phone calls all day, every day, because we couldn't afford any furniture. There was a fellow upstairs who was a CPA, and anytime anyone new would move into the building, he was anxious to get some more business, so he stopped by, knocked on the door, and here we are sitting on the floor making our phone calls. And he walked in and introduced himself, and he said, well, your furniture hasn't arrived yet, has it? He said, no, it's on its way, I'm sure. Well, he turned out to be a great blessing, because we used to get these leases that we'd get the leases on equipment, and it was always IBM equipment because that's what we knew. And then we'd sell them to investors. And we made a lot of money for a lot of people. But we had to sell the leases in order to have current cash flow to live on. I would have loved to have kept them all. We'd have been a really wealthy person, but I couldn't keep them. We had to sell them. And so this fellow's name was Rex Olson. Rex helped us sell the leases to his clients. So every time we have a lease, we just take it upstairs to Rex, and he'd sell it to his clients. So we had money day one. First 2 weeks we were in business, I took home a paycheck, thanks to Rex. Do you want to hear another surprise? After we moved from Phoenix, moved our business back to Salt Lake, one day we get a call from a fellow that says, I'm attorney so-and-so, and I represent this particular individual, and he owns one of your leases. I said, no, he doesn't. At that time, we hadn't done so many that you pretty well remembered what you had done. We're just, getting started in the world. He says, never heard of the man. Oh, yes, he's got all the, and he says, is your name Emery? Yes. This is your documents? Yes. Well, my customer owns one of your leases. Huh? So my brother went down to Phoenix to try to straighten the mess out. When he gets down there, what happens? He gets hold of this attorney, and they sit there, and there's copies of the documents, everything with our signatures. These are all copies. They weren't originals. And they thought, Al says, that isn't, now my brother says, that isn't our deal. This guy is not one of our investors. Well, they finally figured out the common link was Rex Olson. So they went over to see Rex Olson. Walked into the office, had the secretary announce he was in, and he didn't come out of his office. He didn't come out, and he didn't come out. So finally Al says, enough of this crap, we're just going in. They just walked in the man's office. And when they got in there, Rex was sitting on his desk, or his desk with his hands like this. And Al says, Rex, tell me about this lease. Who owns it? Rex started to cry. He had got into the gamblers in Las Vegas for a lot of money. He took those leases that we sold him, he'd take the paperwork, he'd make numerous copies and sell it to a number of people. And he knew he'd been caught at that point. But that wasn't where it all ended. Now Rex reached in his desk and pulled out a gun. He was going to shoot himself. Then he was going to shoot my brother. Well, if I hadn't met you guys, I wouldn't have this problem. My brother says, you know, you can see all the guns you want in the movies, but until one's actually pointed at you, that's a different story. Well, they finally talked Rex into putting the gun down. To make a long story short, he went to prison. But he made the headlines in the Phoenix papers because many of his clients and number of people that he had sold to were basketball players, members of the Phoenix Suns. And local accountant cheats Phoenix Suns. Actually, their big star at that time was a fellow by the name of Alvin Adams, and it said, local accountant cheats Alvin Adams. We didn't expect that in our business. We figured that, oh my gosh, now we're going to get sued. Fortunately, we didn't. Didn't expect that. It was a surprise. But that wasn't the end of the surprises. They just kept coming. Whenever we'd get a lease with anyone on equipment, so we got $100,000 worth of equipment and we had a lease and we got X amount per month, we would then take that lease to a bank. We'd take the financial statements of the customer and we'd borrow against the rental stream. And that's how we got our cash flow, to pay for the equipment and hopefully get a little bit of profit. Got a lease one time with a company in Los Angeles, Southern California area, called THH. I can still remember the name. Toys, Hobbies, and Handicrafts. They dealt with the Bank of America, and we'd been going to the Bank of America to get our loans. We had a pretty good relationship there. Well, once we got the deal done, I said, I got to have your financial statement so I can go to the bank and discount this lease. They said, well, we do business with the bank all the time. They've already got our financial statements. So I called the bank and they said, oh yeah, these guys are good. Don't worry about it. We've got it covered. So I didn't worry about it. We did the deal. We got the money. We paid for the equipment. Then THH decided to sell their company and they sold it. A few months later, they bought it back because the new people couldn't handle it. They bought it back for pennies on the dollars. And because of all this transaction, the court says my leases were no good anymore. So they quit paying me. Now guess who the Bank of America was after? In your business classes, I don't know what they teach today, but when I was in school, they taught one of the reasons you have a corporation is to have a certain amount of lack of liability. They protect you. My only comment to that is bull cookies. Because if you get a loan and you're a small company, you sign as a corporate president, you sign as an individual, you sign your 6 children away and anything else you ever have in the world. The banks know how to get your signature on everything. And the Bank of America had our signature on those loan documents. $15,000 a month. And they came to us and said, guess what? You owe us $15,000 a month because the customer's not going to pay anymore. They still had the equipment. They are still using it. They're still running the same business. All they've done is changed ownerships twice. I went and sat down with the people. I said, what's going on here? Well, Mr. Emery, the law's on our side. You're out of luck. I said, yeah, but integrity's on my side. You guys signed those documents. You put, well, that was an old company. We got a new company now. You don't expect stuff like that. But that isn't where it ended. I always thought banks were kind of, high up in the category of being dependable and honest. Bank of America wasn't. I finally went to the data processing manager of this company and told him, I said, I got a problem here. I said, we can't make that $15,000 a month payment. We're just a young company. We're just getting started. And the data processing manager says, hey, I've been making those payments. I've made them every month. Well, says, the bank doesn't say they have. He says, look, I hand carried that last one down because I was a few days late. And he said, I hand carried out, and this is the guy I gave it to. I thought, what's going on around here? Well, what happened is this company had a number of loans with the bank, and they thought, well, they're getting this money here. Let's not put it on the Emery account. We'll put it on one of these other accounts because we don't have guarantors on the other account, but we got the Emery boys. We'll go get them. I didn't think a bank could do anything like that. Excuse me. So what did I do next? I went down to the bank. And I says, tell me about these payments. How much do we owe you? 15 grand a month. I says, you know something? I talked to so-and-so at the office, and he said he personally handed you a check for $15,000 last month and has been paying him every month. I want to know what happened to that money. He didn't say anything. I says, all I want to know is, did you credit to our account or not? Well, we did and we didn't. I says, that's a bunch of nonsense. Did you or didn't you? Well, we were trying to look out for you. I says, yeah, I can tell. I says, here's what's going to happen. I'm leaving this office, I'm picking up a telephone, and I'm calling the banking examiners. Get the feds in here checking out what you guys are doing, because I know what you're doing. Oh, you don't want to do that? I said, no, I don't want to do it, but I will. Guess what? It worked to my advantage because they took us off the loan. I lucked out. But the bank wasn't being honest with me. So I had another experience, learned another lesson that I didn't know. I just assumed that everybody's going to be honest in the world. Doesn't necessarily work that way. Sometimes people do things that aren't as nice as you think they are. I've never been afraid to try something. This company continued to grow. We did very well because my brother and I are both good salesmen, and we started a company in Phoenix. We moved it to Salt Lake because we wanted to come back home where we were raised. We eventually hired my other brother, who was a CPA, to run the company. We said, look, you be the president, you run the company, we'll go out and generate the income. It worked very well because the one brother likes to do the CPA type stuff. So we went out, but we would take on any deal, and I liked the big deals. If it was $100 million, $50 million, $20 million, I didn't want any $10,000 deals because I found out it was just as easy to close a big deal as it was a little deal. But here again, we ran into some interesting problems. I got a call one day from somebody who says, do you lease airliners? I said, of course, we know all about it. Liar. What do you got in mind? This company wanted to lease 2 big jumbo jets, Lockheed L-1011s. They're like the big 747s that you see today. And they were trying to find financing for them.
So what was the name of your company?
We called it Matrix Funding.
Matrix Funding?
We got the name off a golf club. We were trying to decide what to call it. My brother had just bought some new golf clubs that said Matrix on them. Oh, okay, that sounds good enough. You can tell how carefully we thought this thing through. But the key is, we were willing to try. We were willing to try to steal second base, and we knew how to work. We knew how to work. If you don't know how to work, you're going to fail anyway, I'll guarantee you. You got to get up in the morning and you got to work. Whether you're in school, whether you're in business, I don't care, you got to work. And here's another instance. So we ended up doing the lease on 2 big jumbo jets. $50 million deal. You know, the things we didn't know about jets, you have to maintain them. People who fly around the world like to have them in good shape. And so these airplanes have to go through A checks, B checks, C checks, and D check. By the time you get to a D check, basically they tear them right apart and rebuild them. Total overhaul. 2 of them, 2 jumbo jets, $50 million deal. 50 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 million deal. When you lease to one of those companies, then they have to put so much money aside every month for maintenance, and so the cash is there to take care of these checks. $250,000 a month in lease payments and $250,000 a month in reserves for maintenance. Now, if I add that up correctly, that's about $500,000 a month. I mean, we're now dealing in big numbers. Two little guys in Salt Lake City, Utah. It was going great. Airline was selling their seats. It was a charter airline out of Toronto, Canada. Everything was wonderful. And then what happened?
They went bankrupt.
No, things in Iraq flared up. First thing they called it is Desert Shield. And the price of fuel went zip. So our company that had pre-sold their entire season, that had a profit built right into it, all of a sudden, in order to do their flying, they spent all their money on fuel. They didn't make any money. When you don't have any money, who doesn't get paid? Next year was even worse because that's when the Iraq War actually started. They call it Desert Storm then. And now everyone was afraid to fly. They couldn't sell their seats. So I got a bank coming to me saying, hey guys, $500,000 a month. I said, I'll write you a check. Well, I didn't think a war in Iraq could affect me in Utah, but it did. You just don't know. There's surprises in business, and if you want to get into business, don't be afraid to try, but don't be surprised when you get something jump up that you're not expecting. We had that lease with Air Transat for 10 years. Somehow we managed to keep it together, and I don't even remember how anymore. We kept it together for all that time, and then we finally sold it and got rid of it and actually made a profit. But it took 10 years to do it. You just don't know. Well, one other quick story, we're going to run out.
Jack, and so let's, I know that Stephanie has a question for you. I think her name was Judy. But
Hi, Judy, Stephanie. Is that your middle name, Stephanie? And Judy's your first, right? Well, I'm just going by what Rick says. Did you have a question? She doesn't have a question. You're just trying to embarrass her.
no, I wasn't. I was teasing her.
Oh, okay.
I'm okay. I'll wait a few minutes.
So how much, did you sell your company once you retired?
I did. If I have a minute, I'll tell you about that too. But I got to tell you one other quick story. I decided the aircraft business was a pretty big place to be because, it's a big business. So we started doing what they call sale leasebacks. We'd go to you and say, okay, you own all these airplanes. I'm going to buy them from you. I'll give you hard cash, and then I'll lease them back to you. So you still have them. And there's lots of tax reasons and accounting reasons for doing that, but I won't go into that now. We had a good sales pitch. I was working with Olympic Airlines out of Athens, Greece, on doing their entire fleet of aircraft. It was over a $500 million deal. I loved it. And I was back and forth a number of times, and things worked very well. And I thought, I got this thing cinched. Oh, one quick sideline. They'd fly me back. I'd pay my way to New York, and they'd fly me on their Olympic Airlines from there to Athens. And on their 747s with the upper deck, and that was their first class section. One time coming back, I was the only guy up there, me and 3 stewardesses and the pilot and co-pilot. Well, the pilot came back to have dinner, and we started talking. I'd been a pilot for many, many years, flew for over 30 years. And he says, well, look, why don't you go up there and sit in my seat? And I'm going to stay back here and watch the movie. Okay. So I went and sat in the left seat of a 747 all the way across the Atlantic. Put it in my logbook, pilot in command, 747. Lots of interesting things happen when you're in business. But anyway, the day finally came when I was going to close that deal. I had the documents, everything else. I go back to Greece. I had appointments with the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Transportation on 2 separate days. Now, these are cabinet level people, way up in the government. When I got there, I was met at the airport by a man whose name I've long since forgotten, but he was described as a peddler of influence. I'm not sure what that meant, but that was his job title. That same day, the king of Jordan and his entourage were making a visit to the palace. And they had a big parade route with barriers up. I don't know who this guy was I was with, but when we had to cross the streets where the barriers were, the cops would see him, they just move everybody aside, and we walked right on through. So the local police knew who he was. Well, I get into the palace, which is where he was. I'm sitting on one end, a very ornate room, and on the other end was the delegation from Jordan. I don't know, pretty important company around here. But anyway, I get in with the Minister of Finance, or the Transportation, I've forgotten which. I guess it was the Transportation Minister. We go over this entire contract, review it. He says, okay, he said, we're ready to go ahead on this. And I thought, oh my gosh, look at all the money we're going to make on this deal. And then he said, well, one thing first. And I said, what's that? And he says, well, we'll need you to make a small contribution to our political party, because we'll need to be able to stay in power here. And I said, well, what's a small contribution? He said, not much, just $1 million. I says, in our country, you can go to jail for doing that. We call it bribes. He says, in this country, this is how business is conducted. I didn't know that. Ignorance may not be bliss. It can sure screw things up. So when we left his office, I said to this fellow, the peddler of influence, I said, we're going to meet the Minister of Finance the next day. Is he going to ask for $1 million too? And he said, oh yeah. And he says, I'll want $1 million also. He says, but don't worry about it. We'll just add it on top of the contract, and when you get the cash, he says, it won't cost you a dime. So after he dropped me off the airport, or at my hotel, I went to the airport, got on an airplane, and flew home, and that was it. I'd worked and worked and worked on that deal, and it all fell apart because of the way they conducted business with their bribes. Well, you read in the paper recently all the trouble that Greece is having, and you can see why if that's how they did it all the time. Okay, one quick thing. Somebody asked me when we sold our company. We built our company up. We had about 50 employees. We were doing about $100 million a year on the average. So we weren't a big company. We weren't a little dinky company either. But we were a fairly good-sized company. Somebody wanted to come along and buy us. There was a group of what they call consolidators that would go out and buy a number of companies, of similar companies, and put them all together into one big company, and then they'd go public on the New York Stock Exchange. These consolidators were looking for leasing companies. But I didn't know they were crooks. I just thought they were legitimate businessmen. They bought a number of leasing companies. Our little company represented 9% of the total. We were that small. We were one of the little guys. But we were generating 50% of their total profits. These guys were just manipulating the market. It was a $650 million offering. We got half cash and half stock. Wish I'd have held out for all cash now, but you know, we came out all right. But the problem is this. It took me 20 years to build it. It took them 2 years to destroy it. Because they were $650 million on the initial offering, $500 million in debt to Bank of America, and Bank of America came in and just shut everything down. These are my employees that I'd had for many, some of them have been there since day one, for 20 years, or almost that long. They walked into the thing and says, leave now, don't touch a thing, you're out of here, you can come back later on one at a time, and you can take anything that's your personal property, if you can prove it's your personal property. They literally threw all the employees out onto the street. So there was the end of all of my efforts. I thought once we sold it and it got into the New York Stock Exchange and all this kind of good stuff, that company will last till the end of time. Lasted 2 years. You got to remember one thing. Have enough guts to steal second base. Don't be afraid to try. Failure is not permanent. Everybody fails. Whether it's your fault or somebody else's fault, doesn't matter. I have here one of my favorite things, and I'm going to read to you, and there's a copy here for everyone. Theodore Roosevelt gave a talk in Paris in 1910. And in his talk, this is just an excerpt from that talk. It's called The Man in the Arena. I want to read it to you because it's a good thing to quit on. It's not the critic, excuse me, it's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error, no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasm, the great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, and who at best knows in the end the triumph of great achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. I love that. In fact, in my wallet, I have a little printout of that whole thing, and I've carried it there for 50 years. Be willing to try. Try to steal second base. You're going to throw out a lot, but you'll succeed occasionally. Thank you very much for inviting me. I enjoyed being here.